My name is Ann Campbell. Like many of you, I'm a certified cheese professional. I worked for many years as a monger, a buyer, and a store manager. I am the 2019 Daphne Zepos Teaching Award recipient, and a lot of the work that I'm going to be presenting today is the result of my work on that project. So right now, I'm a graduate student in the history of science at Indiana University in Bloomington. I really hope we've got some of our Indiana cheese people here. That would be really wonderful. Fingers crossed. So I hope, without dwelling on that too much, I hope that I can kind of give you some insight on how I'm approaching cheese as an object of study from this approach of the history of technology. So I am really glad to have you guys all here. This is really exciting to get everybody together and gather like this, even if it's remotely. So this year has been really tough. The worst is yet to come, okay? So I'm really feeling the loss of things like CMI and ACS and all of these trips and the visitations and all of these things that we do where we get together as cheese people and it really coalesces and makes our community really enduring. So I'm so glad that we get to have an opportunity to hang out with each other and talk and learn about stuff. So I, on the other hand, teach at a university, so teaching these classes via Zoom has become a regular everyday thing for me. So hopefully it will go as smoothly as it's been going. So we're all coming from different cities, different places. We're coming from different counters, different points in the supply chain. So what I'd like everybody to do first is if you go up to these three little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your Brady Bunch tile, if you want to, you can use that to name yourself. Put in your name, put in a city, toss a nickname, pronouns in there. Tell us a little bit about what you do, what your position is, and that can really help us keep this community here. So I'd also like everybody to start us off, I want everybody to toss up into chat their favorite Mediterranean country, okay? A place they love visiting, a place they can't wait to visit, a place where their favorite cheese is from, a place that really interests you, you're curious about, anything like that. I'm already liking how this is starting out. And yes, anywhere that allows a plane ticket ain't that just the truth? Cyprus, great. Iran, great. Turkey, great. Sardinia, wonderful. So these are a lot of really great responses, okay? I'm really loving that we're seeing stuff like Lebanon, Cyprus, seeing all of these places come in here. As you can imagine, we also get a lot of Italy, Greece, right? And I think that that's really what we want to do by the end of this session, is to find a way that we can appreciate places like Spain and France and Italy, but move away from that conception as European. So, right, when we focus on places like Spain, Italy, Greece, you know, we have this idea of the Mediterranean, but when we scope out, feel free to move your panel around so you can see more. We're missing out on all these other areas of the Mediterranean that are not in Europe, right? When we discuss the Mediterranean, we talk a lot about European countries, but we don't discuss North Africa or Western Asia nearly as much. And the Mediterranean is the meeting point of three continents. It's the confluence of the entirety of the Eastern Hemisphere, and Europe is just a small part of that. So like I said, our goal today is to put European cheeses in a global context, specifically in a context of the Mediterranean as a cheese-making region that includes more than just Europe. So as a historian, I advocate for a post-colonial approach in my research. So to confront colonial power structures, acknowledge globalization and imperialism, and return agency that has not been included in traditional historic narratives. So a post-colonial approach, whether you're talking about history or cheese or literature or film, it's not just about going outside of Europe to find stories, though that is a large part of it. It's also about revealing elements of Western history that really isn't Western at all, and bringing those stories into the Western narratives. So today I want to look at some elements of European cheeses that are better understood from an extra-European context. So I want to start by talking about a familiar cheese, but it's one that we, I think, as cheese people, at least as retailers, maybe we perhaps have never been sure how to place it, and that's Feta. So Feta feels out of place. It feels out of place in our canon of European cheese. It's absolutely different from even the softest, freshest cheeses in the case. And I know that retailers among you are thinking of the challenges you faced when merchandising Feta, or trying to really understand how it fits into your assortment. So I visited a Feta producer in Greece on the island of Lesbos as part of my DZTA project. And the first thing I want to call your attention to is this map here, and to call your attention to the location of Lesbos. So Lesbos is a Greek island, but it's not quite so when you really look at this map here. So you'll see that it's not just far from the Greek mainland, it's off the coast of Turkey. Okay, this is off the coast of Western Asia. And when we place Lesbos in this geographic context, we can really better anticipate some geological elements of the landscape, historical, cultural elements that are more aligned with Turkey, with the Near East, with Central Asia. So let me discuss briefly some history of Lesbos. So it's known that Lesbos was home to Greek speakers by the classical period. But its history until the Middle Ages, it's very dynamic. It has a lot of coming in and going out of Greek, Turkish, Persian cultures. In the Middle Ages, Lesbos is part of the Byzantine Empire. But after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, it is squarely under Ottoman rule until the early 20th century, when it's incorporated into a newly independent Greek state. So Lesbos represents this node, this kind of connection of the furthest edge of a number of empires that combined stretch across the entirety of the Eastern Hemisphere. So in particular, I want us to consider the Ottoman culture. So the Ottoman culture extended through Central Asia and is comprised primarily of pastoral cultures. So fermented milk products and cheese, these are foundational elements of Ottoman nutrition, especially in Central Asia's inhospitable terrain, right? We know that this is a problem that is often solved by technologies like shepherding and cheese making. So I really want us to contrast the Ottoman idea of food and agriculture with this Byzantine culture. So Byzantine culture primarily excluded dairy for Christian rules due to fasting. In the Ottoman Empire, it's primarily Muslim, but moreover, it's primarily a culture of meat and milk consumption. So in terms of pastoral heritage, we can view Lesbos as part of this Ottoman dairying culture, along with Central Asia and Turkey. So I really want to talk about geology. If you guys have worked with me, if you've traveled with me, if you've talked with me at all, you know that this is very typical for me. The terrain is so fundamental in how it creates challenges that pastoral and cheese-making technologies address. And geology is why we associate a diversity of cheeses with a diversity of landscapes. So Lesbos is an ideal example. It's pictured here in this really great topographical map. as it's just geologically fascinating. And the island has this clear split between east and west. So the east includes Malini, this is the major city, and it's primarily lowland. The areas are usually either marshy or cultivated primarily with olives and citrus. And moving west across higher altitudes, you cross the pine forest and descend into the west side of the island. So the west side is made primarily of volcanic deposits that are about 20 million years old. Both sides of the island, you can scope out a little bit. Some of these are rocks and some of these are sheep. Who knows? So both sides of the island engage in shepherding, but while the east side has other agricultural pursuits, the west is more limited to pastoralism because of the terrain. And this divide on the island, it's not subtle, it's not gradual, it is immediate and an unmistakable change as you cross the island. On the west side of the island is the village of Agra, and this is where I visited a producer of iconic Greek and lesbian cheeses, Ladiotiri, Mizithra, and Feta. So for those of you who work with Essex, you're already familiar with their exceptionally good Feta. This is Kyrios Tastanis. He is the cheesemaker, and I was able to spend time with him working in his make room and learning what makes his product distinctly lesbian. So Tastanis is a second-generation cheesemaker, and his description of his own products supports the notion that the island's geology matters to the cheese. In general, he says that the sheep products of Lesbos, that's both meat and milk, are the most highly prized meat and milk products in Greece. He attributes this to the distinction, he attributes this distinction in the flavors to the fact that sheep graze along the seaside and they consume the salt and mineral content along with a diversity of herbs, and this makes for a sweeter flavor. And he goes on to add that the western side of the island produces better tasting milk because the sheep are not eating olive leaves. Olive leaves, he says, gives a bitter taste to the milk. So the process of making feta, details aside, it's not dissimilar to a number of other cheeses. I know we've all been taught somewhat of a formulaic model of how cheese, that's the grand capital C cheese, gets made, and it's the nuance and the detail that create this diversity of styles. So for me, and perhaps for many of you trying to find an ideal way to merchandise your feta, the brining is the step that stands out to me that makes feta feta. So Tastanis places these large, silky, soft feta cubes into the brine, and this isn't just a preservation step. This is a ripening step. So the texture of the feta evolves in the brine, bringing it into the texture we're familiar with in this cheese, and a texture that really sets it apart from other cheeses in our assortments, other cheeses that we are very familiar with. So like I mentioned, and I'll return to this in a bit, there's just something different about feta, right? It feels out of place in our canon of European cheeses. So we associate feta so strongly with Greece and Greek culture, but this connection may not be as distinct or deep as we think it is. Feta becomes officially associated with Greekness, not in antiquity, but in the 1930s, after the formation of a newly independent Greek state. And this newly independent Greek state is seeking to form its own identity and distance itself from an Ottoman culture. So I want to touch on this idea of national identity. It seems old as time, but it is actually a very modern notion that emerges and takes hold in the late 18th and early 19th century. So this is post-French Revolution. It's a response to this newly formed and reformed French Republic The late 19th century sees some of the first legislation in Europe that serves as a precursor to our PDO system, a similar system, other similar systems of geographic indicators, and even the way we change how we think about things like terroir, right? These ideas that tie the land to the product. So things that say that the authentic product is only from the authentic place. In fact, I'm going to, if you guys are curious about some really good reads on these topics that also have really great bibliographies of their own, I'm going to toss some citations into chat for you. So the notion of national identity and how it connects people to the land and what is perceived as native and pure comes to its height in the early 20th century in Europe with the rise of fascist regimes. And these associations between a nation and its iconic national foods, these aren't simply shed after the Second World War. These are still artifacts that remain in the way that we talk about iconic traditional European food and cuisine. So again, we see Feta strongly connected with Greekness in the 1930s, and the PDO for Feta becomes codified in the late 20th century with the formation of the EU. And this would appear to be a win for Feta producers pushing back on products made elsewhere, but products that tried to co-opt this image of Greekness for their labels and for their branding. But other Feta producers, say in other Balkan states, are now left by law unable to call their traditional products Feta. And by absorbing Feta into the conception of modern Greekness, it begins to detach itself and kind of push away the Ottoman history of cheese making that is carried along by Feta as a cheese making technology. So I think as cheesemongers, as enthusiasts, as cheese professionals of all kinds, we rely on stories, right? We rely on stories that connect people and land. But these stories aren't without consequences, and they aren't always protecting or promoting what we intend to protect and promote. So we're going to do a little activity by way of smaller group discussions. I'm going to put you guys all into little breakout rooms so you can have some smaller groups to talk through some ideas and to discuss these ideas. I'm going to put this up in chat for you as well so you can follow along. So I want you to talk amongst yourselves and discuss reinforcing a connection between people and the land. Guys, I'm going to turn my camera off for a second to hopefully get past a little jittery Wi-Fi. So what social or cultural ideas in agriculture and cuisine reinforce a connection between people and the land? Which elements of these are beneficial? But which elements of these are dangerous? Okay, so I want you guys to kind of weigh the positive and negative of that. Let me put you guys into rooms. All right, so I'm going to send you away to rooms, talk amongst yourselves, and I'll come by and say hi, okay? And off you go.
What ideas or systems in agriculture and food production reinforce national identity? Which elements of these ideas and/or systems are beneficial, and which are dangerous? Take 5 minutes to discuss this amongst yourselves or meditate personally on this.
So I want to drop a seed before I move on to another room. So is a PDO preserving a history that is real, or is it constructing a history? So I'm going to leave you guys with that and move on to another room.
Thanks.
Is a PDO preserving a history that is real, or is it constructing a history? Take 5 minutes to discuss this amongst yourselves, or meditate on it personally.
A white-brined cheese is an ancient style of cheese, but this work is not about relics, it's not about origins. This work is about exploring the very rich and contemporary culture of these white-brined cheeses in the Near East and North Africa, including where they have contributed to European cheese making. So let's move further from Western centers to North Africa to what quickly became one of my new favorite cities, and that's Cairo. So scenes like this are very typical in Cairo. Herdsmanship is alive and well in the Nile Valley. Pastoralism and fermentation technologies have been part of North African and East African nutrition for some 10,000 years, right? And this includes cheese. So while in Cairo, I worked with an NGO, Nawaya. So this is an extension service supporting local and traditional producers, not only to preserve traditional foods, but to promote the elements of Egyptian culture that include local products, including a number of fermented dairy products. So the folks at Nawaya emphasized how important it was to promote this idea of Egyptian food that detaches from the images of the pyramids and the Sphinx and returns to medieval Cairo. So this is undoubtedly a golden age for the city, especially in the marketplace. And medieval Cairo is a global epicenter of trade and culture, and the medieval Cairene market includes a number of economic and public health technologies that emerge in this Islamic golden age. So remember, we call the Middle Ages in Europe because they are considered kind of stagnant. They're kind of dull. There isn't a lot going on. But this westward expansion of Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries tells a very different story. So this is one of the innovation in science and technology as an absolute Renaissance era in Islamic culture. So I'm also going to, let's see. These are a couple really, really great books I recommend for you that are about medieval Egyptian foods. And these are excellent. These are translations of some primary sources, and I cannot recommend them enough. So go check those guys out, literally. So some of the events of the westward expansion of the Islamic Empire, which, as you see, it's occurring in these significant areas in Europe, right? This is happening in Italy, this is happening in the Iberian Peninsula. This isn't just happening in Africa and Asia. So of these events that are occurring in the Islamic Empire, you have things like the Arab Agricultural Revolution, which is one of my very favorite historical events. This is bringing new crops from Asia and Africa into Europe. These are iconic Southern European foods, okay? These are also landscape and economic altering technologies of irrigation, of land management, of crop rotation, and we see the localization of animal husbandry. Okay, so this is animal husbandry that revolves around a locally situated farm as opposed to a primarily nomadic system of pastoralism. So I want to take a poll because hopefully your phone poll was helpful. So, poll for all you curd nerds, as you say, or dairy dorks, as I prefer. After the cow, which is the most milked animal in the world? So most of you guys said goat. I got some for camel, that's nice. I cannot believe that a single one of you did not indulge me by answering with giraffe. Water buffalo, after the cow, is overwhelmingly the most milked animal in the world. So we usually relegate the water buffalo to the wild card category in cheese making, but this is the primary dairy species throughout Asia and Africa. And the cheese that I get to see produced in Saqqara, so this is just outside of Cairo, in the Baladani kitchen, is made entirely from water buffalo milk. So a key distinction between North African and European cheesemaking is that African cheesemaking takes place primarily in the home. So it's not made for the market. So to be clear, there is plenty of commercial cheesemaking going on in Egypt and elsewhere in North Africa. But recall that the large, hard, dry styles of cheese that are developed to travel to market, and then there's softer, fresher styles, right, that we tend to see more closely related with home consumption and home production. So keep in mind that this does not indicate some kind of underdeveloped economy of the region, right? North African cheesemakers are not somehow behind Europe in terms of economics, nor is home cheesemaking simply an amateur hobby. The home is the site of genuine traditional cheesemaking in Egypt. And I want to take you through 3 different fermented milk products I observed being produced in Nawaya's Baladini kitchen. So the first product is quiche, which isn't just fermented milk, it's also fermented grain. This is an ancient food of Egypt, but quiche has had an impressive, well, it has an impressive geography. It's known to be made all the way down the Nile River Valley, across North Africa, to the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, east to Iran, all the way north to the Baltics, and where it's a significant source of nutrition historically. So quiche starts with making a buttermilk from the buffalo milk. And grain, in this case bulgur wheat, is soaked in warm water and folded into the buttermilk. And the mixture is rolled into balls, which are let to dry for 3 days, but remain preserved for months, like hardtack. So when it's time to eat, the quiche is reconstituted in milk or water, and it's cooked a number of ways, which varies greatly, especially across the geographic distribution of quiche. And in Baladani, I have it fried in ghee. It's cooked with eggs, which I liken to chilaquiles, and it's served with the ubiquitous aish baladi, the Egyptian flatbread. So the ghee in which the quiche is cooked was another product I had the pleasure of observing being made. The ghee is made from buffalo milk that has been fermented for 3 days, and it's churned in this inflated goat hide. They tie off the whole tiny little jumpsuit onesie at the arms and legs and tail, and it's filled through the neck end. And then it's hung outside, and it is vigorously shaken back and forth for about 40 minutes until you can feel that butter fat come together. And besides the butter, not meant to be eaten as a cold spread. There's no bread and butter in the Baladani kitchen, but it is the primary cooking fat there, just like with the quiche that we had prepared. So the butter is transformed into ghee for cooking the same way we do it in our own house. And these milk solids that accumulate at the bottom, they cook them further into these really crispy little bits. They call them morta. And I ate so many of them off of the edge of a spatula. And they're simply wonderful. What I really want to show you, though, to make the connection between feta by way of white-brined cheeses is this. This is the gibne bihayram. So when I'm visiting the Baladani kitchen in Saqqara, this is January. This is the Saharan winter, and it's the coolest season. And in the Sahara, the coolest season is the most productive season in terms of grass and herbs. So in terms of dairy production, winter in the Sahara is like summer in the north. Clover is blooming, and the animals are producing the most milk, which, as you know, needs to be preserved to consume for the entire year. So the women of the Baladani kitchen make their own rennet, this almina faha, and they make it from the stomach of a buffalo calf. They extract the partially digested milk solids, and they put it through a blender with some chili and some lime. So the rennet and the milk are cooked together, drained, rolled on reed mats. They produce these long, flat, silky smooth slabs. And just like feta, these slabs are cut and stored in brine. For the gibna, storage does not end there. After 3 days of the fresh curd in the brine, it's removed to be packed into clay pots, which are first washed with buttermilk to maintain this sort of mother culture. The women of the Baladani kitchen, they layer this with a lot of different things. Chili is very traditional. Fenugreek is really traditional, and these guys are always excited to do something new. There were a lot of citrus creations there. There was the use of green tomato, which was really wonderful. So it gets layered in the pot, filled to the top. It's sealed and then sits until summer, but it can last for a year in these pots. The finished product is, it's satiny, it's crumbly, it kind of sits in these little pools of its own way. It's really refreshing and sweet, but it's rich and satisfying. It's a tremendous little soft cheese. And this finished cheese, it's of the Egyptian style miche. This is the kind of cheese, this is one of many kinds of cheese that is sold in a medieval Cairene market, or was sold rather. So remember that Cairo in the Middle Ages is the hub of cultural and economic exchange. Its markets are filled with Egyptian cheeses, but there are also cheeses from the Levant. There are Persian cheeses. There is a significant number of styles from Southern Europe, especially Sicily. The image of this medieval Cairene cheese shop, which, let's face it, is so cool. I wish I could time travel and see a market stall like this, but it really represents how global and certainly not strictly European the culture of the cheese shop is, and how our conception of the Mediterranean needs to expand beyond Southern Europe to truly appreciate anything we would call Mediterranean cuisine. So because of the dark corner of the internet you got sent to, there are some time considerations, but I have time for questions, and I also have another little bit of discussion and another activity if you guys are interested in. But maybe, Jewel, can you give some input on how you'd like to manage this last bit?
Yeah, so if you guys, we don't have any questions currently in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, you can throw them into the chat now. If it's a super lengthy one, we can, if you prefer to verbalize it, we can bring you onto the screen also. But yeah, feel free to throw things into the chat, particularly if there's anything that you discussed that came up during your breakout rooms that you think would just be really interesting to share, or maybe something that Anne has insight on from her journeys.
Yeah, if you have questions about the Feta, about the Gibna Biharam, about Nawaya, about the Arab agricultural revolution, you name it. As you guys type some things in, I will chat for a second about what is hopefully next for me for my project. I am, as you know, COVID-19 kind of put a damper on a year of travel and learn, as I'm sure it did for many of you. I still have some traveling to do, so first I need to go to Sicily. I'm going to learn all of these wonderful influences of Arab and indigenous North African culture on the food and agriculture of Sicily, and also to visit Caciocavallo producers. Caciocavallo, which, by the way, is a cheese that is made extensively in North and Eastern Africa as well. I'm also going to go to Portugal. I saw a lot of you guys put Portugal up into the chat at the beginning of the session. That's great. We're on the same page. Portugal also carries these deep, deep artifacts of Islamic influence that's really interesting to me. And in particular, a shared cheese making technology, specifically the use of thistle rennet with sheep's milk, that is also an indigenous pastoral technology of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. So speaking of which, Tunisia and Algeria are also now in the picture for places that I realize I need to incorporate into the story. So if you know cheesemakers, retailers, other cheese professionals in Algeria or Tunisia, please let me know. I'm going to put my email address up in chat. But Jewel, if you want to toss out some questions, that would be great.
Yeah, and as a reminder, apologies for the tech of delays in getting people back in for the breakout rooms. Apologies for that. But we are recording this, so you'll have access to a link If you want it super quickly, I can get that to you by tomorrow. Otherwise, we are making it available on the DZTA website, so that will be where it's archived and always available if you want to wait till the end of the week, just so we can get it up there. But yeah, I think I guess my question, and I think that probably other people have, would be about, so you pose this question about, these social and cultural systems and how they reinforce people in connection to land. When you have done this research, do you think that they can? I mean, obviously you made an argument that there's been some obviously detriment and hiding of like culture and tradition. But what do you take away personally as far as like a goal back now in the States with like white-brined cheeses? I think something we talked about in our breakout room was, would we ever be able to sell like a whole section in our case of a class of white-brined cheeses?
Yeah.
Right? Because we do that with bloomies, we do that with blues, and we're able to sit there and celebrate even 4 different French blue cheeses, maybe, not just Roquefort. But do you think that we could get to that place, or how could we get to that place?
So I think
take logistics out of it and importing and legal and FDA and FCP, take that all out of it?
Well, that's a great question, but that does need to be addressed, is the fact that a lot of these things are not going to be importable. Okay. And I won't get into all of the reasons for that, but if you start with something like Feta, and if you really start putting your feelers out there and you start getting beyond the conception of cheese is going to be included in European specialty assortments and looking for cheese in other specialty assortments, I think if that is a concerted effort, we're going to start finding more and more. But this is my advice if you want to reimagine your case, reimagine your assortment, and put something around a North African fresh brine cheese, because we have an enormous diversity of traditional cheeses like that, and it's called Chev. Okay, so this is the fresh goat's milk cheese, the Loire Valley tradition, which is this moment, and this is the kind of stuff that we've all read about in a lot of little side footnotes about cheese stories, right? Is that the Loire Valley goat's milk cheeses are the product. It's a technology taught by Berber goat herders in this very narrow time period when there was the Moorish occupation of this area of France. And that is a style that has not just stuck around. I mean, it's one of the big ones, right? People ask for this. We put it on all of our salads. And I think that if you take this idea, if you can reimagine Loire Valley goat's milk cheeses as a traditional North African style, you've got a good start there. Put that next to your feta. Let the rest come into place, right? We don't have to do this in one day.
I think that's fascinating. That's awesome. We don't have any questions coming in on the chat. As we're just want to reinforce, we will have the recording available for those who missed anything. But yeah, otherwise, I think it's later, especially for East Coast people. So I think if we're ready to wrap up, we can. Thank you, Anne, so much for preparing.
Thank you, guys.
Doing so much work, especially considering that you weren't able to finish all of your research. I make the argument that you have plenty. Like if this would have been, I don't know what we would have actually done if you had traveled to your 2 other countries. We would have had to greatly cut your presentation because you just have so much fascinating information, especially on
Let me toss up one thing. We're not going to be able to make it to the next activity, but that's okay because there will always be a next time. I just want to give you this food for thought. All right. I know not everyone get in there, but good work, guys. Yep. It's India. Okay. So, I think the point I want to make here is that cheese and dairy culture is not strictly European. This is a global culture. We need to bring places like South Asia into our representation of cheese and dairy. We need to bring places like Latin America into our representation of cheese and dairy. And when you guys, as cheese professionals, whether you're mongers or you are importers or you are educators or you are distributors, that you're in control of the story that you tell about the cheese, and you can change it. So my advice for you guys is to go back to your case, look at your assortment, think about the stories you're telling and how you can open them up to a global perception of cheese.
Awesome. Great. All right. Well, on that note, if you guys have any questions regarding the recording, I'm going to throw in here the email address that you can throw things to. If you have any questions about the recording, getting access to it, info@dzta.org. And otherwise, obviously, there's Anne's email too. If you didn't catch it in the chat, you can always just write us and we'll reshare it with you. But otherwise, thanks so much, everybody, for showing up. And thank you again for the $10 donation. I definitely hope this felt worthwhile for that. But just as a reminder, that money is being donated to the Continuing Education Fund for anyone who's won the DZTA. So that money is going back into more opportunities for our past recipients to continue their education, either through traveling, obviously not happening right now, or different kinds of opportunities. So really appreciate your support. Know that not everybody has tons of money right now, and there's lots of really wonderful places for us to be giving our funds to. So thanks for your small donation. It means a lot. And anyways, thanks everybody. Have a great night and stay safe. Love you all.
Thanks, guys. Good to see everyone.